Love is the first and most essential bond, but it's also the invisible thread, woven with time, attention and tenderness, through consistent nurturing relationships, which creates the grounded and meaningful environments around a child.
Kate Middleton discovered something in the palace attic that left her shaking. Prince William's secret sister, hidden for decades. Diana's biggest heartbreak, finally exposed. A baby girl taken at birth. The cover-up that changed everything. What the royal family didn't want you to know. When William found out the truth, even he couldn't believe it. Prince William has spent his entire adult life managing expectations. He knows how to smile for the cameras, how to say the right things at royal engagements.
The security and the safety that they need. And we're a very open family, so we talk about things that bother us and things that trouble us. But you never quite know the knock-on effects it can have.
And how to carry himself with the quiet dignity that the monarchy demands. By most accounts, he's good at this. The public sees a calm, composed man who seems built for the weight of responsibility that comes with his position. He's reliable, measured, and everything the institution needs him to be. Yet there's a difference between what someone shows the world and what they carry in private. And William carries something that has followed him since childhood, a weight that grows heavier with each passing year. The evenings are when it becomes most noticeable. After the cameras have turned away and the public duties are finished, after his children are in bed and the staff have stepped back into the background, William finds himself alone. Sometimes it's in his study, with a cup of tea beside him that remains untouched for hours. Kate notices these moments. She's learned to recognize the shift in his eyes, the way he looks at something no one else can see. When she asks if he's all right, he tells her the same thing every time. He's just thinking, just reflecting on the day. But both of them know it goes deeper than that. These aren't casual thoughts that come and go. These are memories that have visited him for decades, fragments of moments and conversations that he's never quite been able to explain to anyone. They pull at him during quiet hours, when there's nothing to distract him from the weight of knowing something he's never supposed to talk about. William was still a boy when his mother died. 9 years old when Princess Diana was killed in that car crash in Paris in 1997. The world watched him at her funeral, a small figure in a dark suit, walking behind her coffin alongside his younger brother Harry. The image became one of the most significant moments in recent royal history. 2 young boys grieving in front of the entire nation, and he was already learning to keep his emotions controlled, to carry his pain in public with a strength that seemed impossible for someone so young. But there were things about his mother that he understood back then, small details and moments that stayed with him. Diana was a woman who cared deeply about the truth. She wanted to connect with people, not just stand apart from them behind royal protocol. She had her own kind of sadness that sometimes showed through, even when she was smiling. And there were conversations he overheard, whispers late at night when he wasn't supposed to hear them. His mother spoke in a voice he'd never heard before, full of something he couldn't quite name. Longing, maybe, or pain. One evening that he remembers clearly, his mother was speaking with someone close to her. The house was quiet, and William heard her voice coming from another room. He wasn't trying to eavesdrop exactly, but he couldn't help listening. She was talking about someone, about hearing this person in her dreams, about seeing their face. His mother's voice was different, more raw than he was used to. And then there was something else, something she said that made his young mind struggle to understand what was happening. Someone had refused to let her talk about it. Someone had told her to be quiet, to move on, to forget. He wanted to run in and ask her who she was talking about, but something stopped him. Maybe it was instinct, or maybe it was the fear of interrupting something that he sensed was important. So he stayed quiet and listened, and he never asked. The next morning, Diana was herself again. She made breakfast. She laughed with Harry. She seemed fine. But William had seen something shift. There was a sadness behind her eyes now that he hadn't noticed as clearly before. It was there in the way she looked at him sometimes, like she was searching for something or trying to memorize his face. As the months went on, he started noticing other things. His mother would disappear for hours without explanation. When she came back, her eyes would be red, and she'd seem distant for a while before she'd pull herself together. He saw documents on her desk sometimes, envelopes with no address on them, and once, he found something that confused him even more. A photograph tucked inside one of her books. It showed a baby girl wrapped in a pink blanket. On the back, in his mother's handwriting, were just 4 words: "My little one." When he asked her about the photograph, Diana's reaction was immediate and strange. She went very still for a moment, like he'd caught her off guard. Then she smiled, but it wasn't quite her normal smile. She asked where he'd found it, gently, like the answer mattered more than it should. When he told her it was in her book, she didn't explain what the picture was or who the baby was. Instead, she pulled him into her arms and held him tighter than usual. She told him that one day he would understand, but not yet, not now. Those moments accumulated over the years. The conversations he partially heard, the tears he witnessed when she thought no one was watching, the careful way certain subjects were avoided in the palace. William didn't have a complete picture of what was happening, but he knew his mother was keeping something hidden, something that caused her real pain. And then she was gone. The accident in Paris took her from him, and suddenly there were no more chances to ask questions, no more opportunities to understand what she had been carrying all those years. He was 9 years old, and he had lost both his mother and the chance to ever know the full truth about what had made her so sad. The years that followed were spent learning to be a prince in a way that protected his privacy and his pain. William grew up into the role he was meant to play. He became the composed, reliable figure that the monarchy needed. He learned when to speak and when to stay silent. He understood the value of keeping things private, of protecting the institution and the family reputation, but the questions never really left him. As he got older, he would occasionally remember something his mother had said or something he'd witnessed. He would see her in old photographs and try to understand the depth in her eyes. What had she been carrying? What was it that she wasn't allowed to speak about? Why had she seemed so determined that he would someday understand, even if she couldn't tell him directly? These thoughts would come to him at unexpected moments. During family gatherings, when his children would play and laugh around him, something would shift inside him. He'd find himself growing quiet, his mind traveling somewhere else. Kate would reach over and take his hand, gently bringing him back to the present. She never pushed him to explain. She simply stayed beside him, understanding in her own way that there was something he carried that had nothing to do with royal duty or public responsibility. It was a different kind of burden, not the weight of the crown, but the weight of silence, the weight of loving someone and never being able to fully understand their pain, the weight of having questions that could never be answered, at least not through normal means. So on the quiet evenings, when William sat alone in his study, it wasn't just reflection or casual thinking. It was a conversation he was having with himself and with a mother he could no longer reach. It was an attempt to solve a puzzle that had been sitting in the back of his mind for most of his life. And it was the beginning of something that would eventually force him to confront a truth that the royal family had spent decades keeping buried. The weight grew heavier with time, not lighter, and eventually, it would become impossible to carry alone. The afternoon light at Anne Hall had that particular quality that comes with autumn. It was the kind of day where the sun seems softer than usual, filtering through the windows at a gentle angle that makes everything in the house look like it's been painted in gold and amber. Kate had decided to spend the day going through some of the older things stored in the attic. It wasn't a task she'd planned with any urgency. Rather, it was one of those quiet projects that comes to you on an afternoon when everyone else is occupied, when the house feels peaceful and there's time to simply be still. She'd been up there for a few hours, moving through boxes and discovering the layers of history that accumulate in a home over time. Old letters, photo albums, things that belonged to the previous occupants, things that spoke of lives lived before William and his family moved in. There was something meditative about it, sorting through these pieces of the past. Each item told a small story: a faded scarf, a collection of old photographs, documents that no longer seemed to matter in any urgent way. The air in the attic had that particular smell that attics always have: cedar and dust, the scent of things that have been stored away and undisturbed for a long time. The light was coming in through the small window, creating a soft glow that made the whole space feel a bit like stepping back in time. It was while Kate was moving through one of the boxes, carefully handling the fragile things she found there, that her fingers brushed against something different, something that wasn't like the other items she'd been discovering. It was a small wooden box, tucked beneath a pile of yellowed papers that seemed to have been deliberately placed on top of it. The box itself was plain but well made, the kind of thing that someone had cared for. Its edges were smooth, and on the lid there was a tiny emblem engraved into the wood. A single letter. D. Kate's hand hesitated for a moment. There was something about finding something so carefully hidden that made her pause. She lifted the box toward the light coming through the attic window, getting a better look at it. The letter on the lid was small but clearly intentional. Someone had taken the time to put it there. When she tried to open the box, the hinges creaked faintly, the sound of something that hadn't been disturbed in a very long time. The lid resisted slightly, as if whatever was inside wanted to remain undisturbed. But when it finally opened, Kate found herself looking at something that made her breath catch in her throat. Inside was a small diary, the kind of thing that speaks to private thoughts, to the kind of writing that someone does when they need to say things that they can't say out loud. The diary was bound in pale leather, and the pages were edged with gold. It was a beautiful thing, clearly something that had been important to whoever had owned it. The lock on it was delicate, and it appeared to have been broken a long time ago. But it was the handwriting that made Kate's heart skip. When she lifted the diary out of the box and looked at the first few pages, she recognized the writing immediately. It was Diana's. The handwriting of someone who had been gone for over 2 decades, but whose presence still somehow filled the house. Kate sat very still for a long moment, holding the diary in her hands as if it might disappear if she wasn't careful. She knew what she was holding. This was something private, something that Diana had written in her own hand, something that William had never mentioned, something that his mother had apparently wanted to keep hidden, locked away in a small box in the attic of a house where William's family now lived. She made her way downstairs slowly, the diary still in her hands. When William came in later that evening, his sleeves rolled up, and with that tired look he always seemed to carry these days, she was waiting for him. She showed him what she'd found. She watched his face as he recognized his mother's handwriting and saw the way his entire body seemed to go still. He didn't say anything for a long moment. He just looked at the diary, unable to seem to touch it at first. Finally, with a deep breath, he opened it. The pages were yellowed but still readable. The ink had faded in some places, but Diana's voice was there, alive in every word. The handwriting was the same as the letters William remembered from his childhood. The same handwriting that had written his name with such love, that had penned words he'd held onto for so long. The first entry was dated April 1979, long before William was even born. Diana had written about the palace feeling cold, about the kind of loneliness that comes from being surrounded by gold but starved for warmth. William read the words slowly, understanding for the first time what his mother had been experiencing in those early days of her life as a royal. But as he read further, he came to an entry that made him stop completely. June 1980. The words were written in a hand that seemed less careful than the others, more rushed, as if Diana had needed to get these thoughts down quickly before she lost the ability to express them at all. She had written about being told something devastating, about being told that someone hadn't made it. The words were vague, written in the way that someone writes when they're trying to describe something too painful to say directly. But then Diana had written something that made William's entire world seem to tilt slightly. She had written about hearing a cry, about hearing a first cry and then nothing, about asking to see someone, to hold them, and being refused. William had to read the passage several times before he understood what his mother was describing. The words were fragmentary, broken by what seemed to be tears or pauses in the writing, but the meaning was becoming clear, even though it seemed impossible. Diana was describing having given birth to someone, and that person was being taken away from her. He looked at Kate. His voice was barely above a whisper when he spoke. "She wrote this before I was born," he said. Kate didn't answer, just nodded for him to keep reading. The next entry, dated a few weeks later in August 1980, was darker in tone. Diana had written about being told to move on, about being told that whatever had happened was a tragedy that needed to stay private, that it would hurt the monarchy if anyone found out. She had written about sleepless nights, about dreams where she could see a face, about waking up with her hands reaching for someone who wasn't there. The words were desperate, in a way that William had never heard his mother be, even when talking about her troubled marriage or the pressures of royal life. Another entry, This one, undated but clearly written around the same time period, was perhaps the most stark of all. Diana had written about remembering a hand, a tiny hand, warm for just a moment. And then the words became almost fractured. Then they took her. William stopped reading. He couldn't seem to move for a moment. The world felt like it was shifting beneath him in a way that he couldn't quite process. A daughter. His mother had written about a daughter. Not in the way someone might write about a miscarriage or a loss in the abstract, but in the way someone writes when they have held something in their arms, when they have felt another person's heartbeat, when they have given birth and then had that child taken from them. Kate was watching him, and when he looked at her, he saw tears in her own eyes. She squeezed his hand gently. Maybe she truly did, Kate said softly. She wouldn't have imagined something like that. William turned back to the diary. The rest of the entries continued in the same vein. Diana had written about the people around her dismissing her pain, about being told to smile and carry on for the sake of the royal image. She had written about being told to forget, about being assured that it was for the best, about the agony of not knowing what had happened to her child. The handwriting became shakier as the entries went on, as if the act of writing about her experience was taking something out of her. The diary ended abruptly. The last entry was dated just before her wedding to Prince Charles, and then the pages were blank. Whatever Diana had needed to say, whatever she had needed to process, she had stopped writing about it. Perhaps she had decided that it was too dangerous to continue. Perhaps she had accepted that this was something she would have to carry alone and in silence. William sat with the closed diary in his hands for a long time. The implications of what he had just read seemed to expand with each passing moment. This wasn't a rumor. This wasn't speculation or the kind of thing that people whispered about. This was his mother's own account of an experience that had clearly scarred her deeply. This was proof, in her own handwriting, that she had given birth to a child that no one had ever publicly acknowledged. He finally spoke, his voice quiet and measured, though there was something shaking underneath it. "This isn't just a rumor," he said. She really believed she had lost a child. The way he said it, the way he was struggling with the reality of what the diary described, made it clear that some part of him had always wondered about this, had always carried a question that he didn't know how to ask. Kate moved closer, placing her hand gently on his arm. He looked at her, and he could see that she understood the weight of what they had just discovered. "Maybe she wanted you to find it," Kate said. "Maybe she wanted you to know she never stopped loving her children. All of them." William stared at the diary, his mind clearly working through the implications of what he had just learned. His entire understanding of his mother, of his own family history, of the secrets that the palace kept, seemed to be reorganizing itself in real time. The woman he had remembered, the woman he had grieved, had been carrying something that was far deeper and far more painful than anyone had ever told him about. It took a long time before either of them spoke again. They sat together in the fading light, the diary between them, this small leather-bound object containing decades-old secrets and a mother's private anguish. William eventually placed the diary back into the wooden box, his fingers lingering over the letter D on the lid. He whispered something, so quietly that it was almost to himself rather than to Kate. "She always said she hated secrets," he said. Maybe this was the one she couldn't bear to tell. As Kate watched him close the lid of the box, she saw something shift in his expression. The quiet grief, yes, but also something else. A kind of understanding was beginning to take shape. The truth had been hidden for decades, sealed within the fragile pages of a mother's diary. And now that truth was demanding to be acknowledged, demanding to be understood, demanding to be reckoned with in a way that nothing else had ever done. The weeks following the discovery of the diary were unlike anything William had experienced before. He found himself caught between two worlds. In one, he was still the prince that the public expected him to be. He attended his royal engagements, he smiled for the cameras, he performed his duties with the same composed professionalism that had become second nature to him. But in the other world, the private one that no one could see, he was consumed by questions that demanded answers. He began making phone calls from his private study. Quiet calls, carefully planned, made without the knowledge of palace advisors or public relations teams. He wasn't following official channels. He wasn't bringing anyone else into this. It was just him, trying to piece together a story that had been deliberately fragmented and hidden away. His private secretary helped arrange things discreetly. understanding without needing full explanation that this was something William needed to do alone. He reached out to old staff lists from the palace, names of people who had worked there decades ago. He contacted former royal aides, people who had been close to his mother during the early years of her marriage. He even reached out to people who had worked in the medical field around the time the entries in the diary were written. Many of these people were reluctant to speak. Some claimed they remembered nothing, their memories clouded by time or perhaps by the careful conditioning that came with working for the royal family. There was an understanding, deeply embedded in the culture of palace work, that certain things were simply not discussed, that discretion was paramount, that loyalty to the institution came before any other consideration. But slowly, one name began to appear with increasing frequency: Nurse Alice Hampton. She had been a midwife in the early 1982, stationed near a private royal residence. She was long retired now, living quietly by the sea in Devon. When William's private secretary finally located her, it took some careful navigation to arrange a meeting. They couldn't announce themselves as the royal family. There had to be discretion, a way to meet that wouldn't draw attention or create questions. The drive down to Devon was long and quiet. William sat in the back of a car that wasn't the typical royal vehicle, dressed in clothes that wouldn't immediately identify him as who he was. The countryside rolled past the windows, green and ordinary, and he found himself thinking about his mother, about what she had been doing all those years ago, when this woman Alice had been young and working in the palace hospitals. When he arrived at the small cottage by the sea, the air carried the salty smell of the coast and a kind of peaceful quietness that felt far removed from the royal world. Alice answered the door slowly. She was old now, her frame frail, wrapped in a thick cardigan against the sea breeze. When she saw William, recognition flickered across her face. She didn't say anything about who he was. She simply invited him inside, her voice trembling slightly. "I thought you might come one day," she said. They sat at a wooden table with sunlight streaming through lace curtains. The room was modest, filled with the quiet comfort of a life lived simply. William looked at this woman who had been young when his mother was alive, who had been in the palace during the exact time period when the diary entries had been written. "I need to ask you something," he said softly. "About my mother." Alice's hands fidgeted with her teacup. She seemed to be wrestling with something, deciding whether to speak or remain silent. "Your mother was kind," she finally said. "So kind. Too kind for what they did to her." William's throat tightened. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. "What did they do?" he asked. Alice looked at him with eyes that held decades of memory. "You're not the first child she carried," she said quietly. William felt the words as if they were physical. They hit him in a way that no amount of reading the diary could have prepared him for. This wasn't conjecture or interpretation. This was someone who had been there, who had been present, who was now confirming something that William had read in his mother's own handwriting. He waited for Alice to continue. She seemed to need time to collect herself, to find the right words for something that clearly still affected her deeply. "You mean she was very young?" William prompted gently. Alice shook her head. "Very early in her marriage," she said. "Before you. They told her it was too early, that it wasn't safe, that the world wasn't ready for it. The pregnancy was hidden. Only a few of us knew. When the baby came, it was premature, a little girl." The room seemed to shift slightly. William found himself gripping the edge of the table. A daughter. His mother had given birth to a daughter, not in the way the diary entries had suggested as a possibility, but as a confirmed fact. "They said it would ruin everything," Alice continued. "So they arranged for her to be taken quietly, raised under another name. I was told to leave not long after. Dismissed. But I remember your mother's face, the way she screamed for her baby, the way they had to sedate her to stop her from looking for the child." William felt tears burning behind his eyes, but he forced them back. He needed to hear this. He needed to understand exactly what had happened, even though each word was like a wound being opened. "Why didn't anyone ever tell me?" he asked. "Because the truth," Alice said softly, "was never meant to leave the walls of the palace." When William left the cottage later that afternoon, he felt changed in a way that he couldn't fully articulate. The waves crashed against the shore as he stood for a long time, staring out at the horizon. Somewhere in those crashing waves, He could almost hear the echoes of his mother's cries from all those years ago, the sound of a woman desperate to keep her child, facing an institution that would not allow it. Back at the palace, the routines continued. William attended meetings, he made public appearances, he smiled when he was supposed to smile. But inside, something had fundamentally shifted. He now understood why his mother had carried such deep sadness. It wasn't just about her troubled marriage or the pressures of royal life. It was about a loss that was real and profound, a child that had been taken from her not by death, but by calculation and institutional necessity. He returned to the diary that night, reading the entries again with new understanding. The words that had seemed cryptic before now felt painfully clear. When Diana had written about hearing a cry and then nothing, she had been describing the moment when her newborn daughter was taken from her. When she had written about reaching for someone who wasn't there, she had been describing the empty ache of losing a child while that child still lived somewhere in the world. Over the following weeks, William began trying to piece together more information. He was looking for records, for documentation, for anything that might tell him what had happened to his mother's daughter after she was taken. But what he discovered was that almost every trace of this event had been carefully erased. Files were missing, names had been changed, documents had been removed from the official records. It was as though someone had methodically built a wall around the truth, brick by brick, making it nearly impossible for anyone to ever understand what had actually happened. This revelation shook him in a way that nothing else had. The magnitude of it, the deliberate nature of the cover-up, the institutional machinery that had been put in place to ensure that this secret stayed buried. It wasn't just that a child had been given up for adoption. It was that powerful people had decided that this event needed to be erased from history entirely. Each night, William would sit in his study and think about what Alice had told him. He thought about his mother in the palace, screaming for her baby, being sedated to keep her from searching. He thought about the years she had spent after that, carrying the knowledge of a child she couldn't speak about, couldn't acknowledge, couldn't even officially grieve. And he thought about the daughter herself. Somewhere in the world, there was a woman who didn't know the truth about who she was or where she came from. A woman who was his half-sister, his mother's child, a person who had been erased from the official family narrative before she even had a chance to exist in it. Kate found him one evening, staring at the diary again. "You can't carry this alone," she said gently. "If I tell anyone, it could destroy everything," William replied. His eyes were fixed on the pages of his mother's handwriting, the evidence of her anguish preserved in ink and time. Kate knelt beside him, taking his hand in hers. "But hiding it is destroying you," she said. William said nothing. He only stared into the fire, watching the flames flicker and dance, feeling the weight of this truth settle more heavily on his shoulders with each passing day. He understood now why Diana had been restless, why her eyes had so often looked far away even when she was smiling. She had been living a lie her entire public life, forced to pretend that a fundamental part of her had never existed. And he understood that he now had a choice to make. He could continue to carry this secret, protect the institution, and maintain the careful fiction that the royal family had constructed around this event. Or he could search for the truth, no matter where it led, no matter who it might affect. He could do for his mother what she had not been allowed to do for herself. He could search for the daughter they had taken away. That night, as he looked out at the dark gardens below the palace, William made his decision. He would find his mother's child. He would find his sister. The soft glow of evening light had settled across the study at Kensington Palace, the kind of light that comes late in the day, when the sun is low enough to paint everything in gold and shadow. The house was quiet. The children had been put to bed hours ago, their laughter and energy fading into the peaceful stillness of night. Kate had retired upstairs, leaving William alone in his study, the one place where he could sit with his thoughts without interruption. On his desk sat a blank page and a pen. This was something he had decided to do without consulting anyone, without running it by advisors or palace staff. This was purely his own decision, his own choice about what he wanted to say and to whom. He had spent months carrying the truth about his mother's hidden child, months of the weight pressing down on him, of knowing something so significant that it had fundamentally altered his understanding of his own family and his own place in it. He had lived with the secret, protected it, carried it alone despite Kate's gentle insistence that he shouldn't bear this burden by himself. But tonight, he had decided that there was one group of people who deserved to know the truth, even if they didn't know it yet: his children. Someday, when they were old enough to understand, when they had the maturity and the perspective to process what this meant, they would need to know. They would need to understand their own family history, not just the sanitized version that the public knew, but the real version, with all of its complications and pain and truth. He picked up the pen and began to write. The words came slowly at first, each one carefully chosen. This was not a letter for the public. It was not meant for historians or official records or royal archives. It was meant only for his children, to be read when he decided the time was right, to be a gift of understanding and honesty in a world that had taught him the value of careful distance. He wrote about their grandmother, about the woman Diana had been beyond the photographs and the public image. He described her warmth, her genuine care for the people around her, her capacity for deep feeling. He wrote about her sadness too, about the part of her that carried a grief she could never speak about in public. And he wrote about the sister they would never meet, a woman who lived far from the world of cameras and duty, unknown to everyone but now known to him. As his pen moved across the page, William found himself thinking about how to explain something so complex to people who would be reading it in the future. How to help them understand that life within the crown was never about perfection or power or living up to some idealized version of what a royal family should be. It was about being human, about experiencing love and loss and confusion just like anyone else, except doing it behind walls and under scrutiny. He wrote about forgiveness, about how important it was to understand that people in positions of power made decisions that affected others in profound ways. He wrote about his mother's pain and about the institutional machinery that had created that pain. He wrote about his own journey from confusion to understanding, about what it had meant to finally piece together the fragments of his mother's life and come to a place of comprehension. As the night deepened, William continued writing. The words seemed to flow from somewhere deeper than thought, from that place where a son grieved for his mother and also for the child she had lost. He found himself thinking about the meetings that had changed everything. The discovery of the diary in the attic, the conversation with Nurse Alice by the sea, the realization that someone out there carried Diana's blood and perhaps something of her spirit, even if they didn't know it. He paused for a moment, looking at what he had written so far. The letter was becoming something more than he had initially intended. It was becoming a kind of testament, a record of truth that might otherwise be lost to history. A way of ensuring that when his children read these words, they would understand not just the facts of what had happened, but the emotional reality of it. They would understand why their father had carried a particular kind of sadness, why certain dates held special significance, why he had always seemed to be looking for something that he could never quite find. He thought about his sister, the woman he had only met once, whose presence had healed something in him that he didn't fully understand was broken. She lived a quiet life now, far from the chaos and scrutiny of royal life. She wanted nothing from him except the knowledge that she existed, that she was remembered, that somewhere in the world, she was part of a family, even if that family could never acknowledge her publicly. Every year on Diana's birthday, William had kept a promise he had made. 2 bouquets of flowers were sent out into the world. One was laid at the place where his mother rested. The other was left at a small home by the coast. A quiet gesture of remembrance and love toward a sister that no one was supposed to know existed. As the night grew later and his hand began to tire, William reached the end of what he had to say. He signed his name at the bottom of the page, the ink still wet under the pen. Then he carefully folded the letter and placed it in an envelope, sealing it with the kind of care that suggested this was something precious. He reached for a wooden box, one that matched the one Kate had found in the attic all those months ago. Inside it, he placed the sealed letter. Beside it, he positioned a faded photograph of Diana smiling in the sunlight, a moment captured when she was happy, when her eyes held nothing but light. For a long moment, William simply looked at his mother's face, the softness in her expression, the love that seemed to radiate from her even through time and grief and institutional distance. He whispered something so quietly that the words barely disturbed the air. "One day," he said, "the truth will set us all free." Then he closed the box carefully and placed it on the shelf. As he did, Something shifted inside him. The burden that had haunted him for so long felt lighter. The silence that had once hurt now felt peaceful, transformed into something that could be spoken, understood, and finally laid to rest. He had broken the cycle of secrecy, not by announcing it to the world, but by ensuring that truth would find its way forward through the people who mattered most to him. His legacy would not be about maintaining an institution or protecting appearances. It would be about truth and love and the refusal to let silence win.